Hello, welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by Jonathan and Ali this week to look ahead to this weekend's Premier League action. And no doubt the biggest game is the Manchester Derby, and that's the game that we are going to start with. But before I do, let's exchange some pleasantries. Jonathan, not been on for a few weeks, you okay?
I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, I've been on holiday. It was quite nice.
Where did you go?
Went to Romania.
Did you?
Yeah, we went from travel from Cluj down to Bucharest, stopping off various places on the way. Transylvania, heartily recommend.
Did you take in any football in Romania?
Yeah, I went to FCSB, which is what Stara are now called. Against Volunteers. Yeah.
Okay.
FCSB, so FC Stara Bucharest. There's all kinds of issues with who actually owns the rights to the club. Okay. I saw them draw 0-0 against Voluntari. But it was one of those games where about an hour in, I was sort of like, I started thinking, actually, I quite want Voluntari to hold on here because they clearly don't have, clearly Stara's players are better, but Voluntari had a plan. They just sort of were better organised. They had a sort of aging Croatian at the back of midfield, his name I've forgotten, who was very, very good. I liked him a lot. Stara absolutely all over the place. They had a lad called Koman who apparently joined West Brom last summer on the left. He looked quite useful. He got injured, I don't know, like 35 minutes in. Once he got off, they were hopeless.
You're such a culture vulture, Jonathan. My dog, incidentally, is from Romania. In other news, little just
Tebow.
Information. Tebow, as Jonathan knows, a big fan of my work on Instagram and Twitter. Has a keen eye on what I'm posting on social media.
I don't have an Instagram account.
No, I didn't think you would, but I thought maybe you might Google me. Who knows? Who knows what you in your spare time? Ali, back for your third appearance. The Who Scored hat-trick ball will be in the post. Are you okay?
Really well. Yeah, since I last saw you, Dan, I've been in Derby. That's about it. Saw them beat Exeter 2-0 on Tuesday night. A much needed win for them. Exeter 6 defeats in a row, only one. They were top of the league into the first international break, and now they are around 20th and possibly going to get relegated. Football.
Yeah, that's the one. I've been to Villa Park, so I ventured really far since I last saw you. I went to Villa Park on Sunday to watch Villa demolish West Ham. Excellent stuff. Aston Villa absolutely flying at the moment. But let's talk about Manchester United v Man City. And Jonathan, we're going to start with Harry Maguire. Some interesting stats have emerged from Harry Maguire's last 8 starts. That's 8 league wins in a row when he has started. But he hasn't faced a Big Six team in 18 months. The last time he played a Big Six team, or so-called Big Six team, I don't really think that's a thing anymore. It was a 4-0 defeat at Anfield. Scored the winner in the Champions League in midweek, turning it around a little bit, Harry Maguire.
Well, I think what has turned around is that he'd become one of those players to whom unfortunate things happen. And I think that's one of those, I mean, partly is just you get in rotten runs of luck. And I think to an extent it's self-perpetuating because as your confidence drops, you're more likely to do things that will lead you to make mistakes. And I think he's pulled out of that. I think in that sense, yeah, it doesn't really matter if he scores goals or not. That's not what he's there for. But scoring that goal, and such an important goal on Tuesday, that is a huge boost to his confidence. And so from that point of view, I guess he is on the up. Do I think long term is the answer to United's problems? No, clearly not. But yeah, he might quite fancy the idea of stifling Haaland on Sunday. City without De Bruyne don't play as many balls in behind as they were last season. So maybe it will be a more physical battle, and Maguire in a physical battle, maybe he wouldn't back him against Haaland, but he'd have as good a chance as anybody.
Bearing in mind he hasn't played against so-called Big Six opposition in so long, Ali. Will he fancy his chances against Haaland, do you think?
I feel like if there's one thing we know about professional sports people is that they back themselves in almost every situation, and that's probably a reason why they get to where they get to, and the rest of us sort of fall away. But, realistically, I don't think many centre-backs would fancy playing against Haaland because of the threat that he offers. I think Maguire specifically is comfortable with defending players that he can reach, players close to him, defending his box, still very strong in duels aerially, but, and getting tight, or when he can be tight to attackers. I don't think he will be fancying defending Haaland outside the box, defending Haaland when there's any sort of space. And this is kind of the thing with Maguire, where he's playing okay at the moment. I think there's a scenario where if he doesn't make any huge mistakes, then he can start rebuilding a reputation at United, like Jonathan, long term. don't see him being their centre back long term. But they play a style in generally that makes it hard for their centre backs not to be exposed to a certain extent and not to make mistakes. So it's been a good few weeks. This is a huge test for him, and I think we all know what the narrative will be if Haaland scores and Maguire's nowhere to be seen. And the narrative stuff's all a bit tedious, but on a footballing level, it's an interesting matchup.
Yeah, should Manchester United be a little bit worried overall, Jonathan? They've not got off to the best start in the Premier League. I watched them in the Champions League midweek, and I thought they were second best. In all honesty, I thought Copenhagen had the better game plan and actually had an identity and had a better style. And that's the problem I have when I watch Manchester United. So many teams now, I think they've got the perfect manager. They've got an identity at the top end of the Premier League. I still watch Manchester United and I don't really know what they are. And the fact that in recent weeks, McTominay's been the hero, Maguire's been the hero, that doesn't feel sustainable to me. Yeah, all these things don't feel sustainable.
They lost that game at Palace, and then the 3 games since then, they've needed 2 injury time goals to beat Brentford, who are not having a good season. They needed a last-minute goal to beat Sheffield United, who have been awful this season. And they got away with it against Copenhagen. I agree with you. I think Copenhagen were the better side, and Onana makes the penalty save, but also that other save in the second half that gets them the win. So it feels like they've used up a lot of heroics and a lot of drama in the last 3 games to nick wins against teams that really they should be beaten quite comfortably. Now, it may be that is how you turn the corner. That boost is what gives them a springboard. But I don't really look at that side and think, yeah, this is what Ten Hag's envisaged. And that I think is the oddity, that you'd have thought by this stage he's had 3 transfer windows, he spent a lot of money, and yet the players who are getting him out of jail, Maguire, Dalot, McTominay, the old guard, and certainly Maguire and McTominay, he's been trying to shuffle on. He's been quite clear he doesn't want them at the club anymore. I still broadly think that Ten Hag is the right manager. I think last season he was very impressive in quite difficult circumstances. I think he did a lot of the hard work. I mean, getting rid of Ronaldo, for instance, was something that had to be done. I think he did that pretty well. Did that sort of as bloodlessly as was possible. And I could sort of see that, you could see this sort of cold-eyed, ruthless leader who seemed to know what he was aiming at. And this season, that seems to have fallen away. And the big question for me is the signings that he's made that are clearly his signings. So Anthony, a huge fee, has done very, very little. Lisandro Martinez, I mean, good season last season with odd little worries. This season before the injury had been pretty poor. Onana, obviously great game on Tuesday, but has not had an easy start. And again, a pretty big fee. So that would be my concern. The recruitment that he's been responsible for, and the agency that represents him has seems to have had quite a lot of sway in the last 15 months or so. Are they really getting the players they need? And are they getting them at competitive prices? And that would be the doubt. And so when the Jim Ratcliffe investment happens, and Ratcliffe, if he does take over the football side of things, we know that his Nice team tried to appoint Ten Hag, that he's sort of long term. He's a respecter of Ten Hag, but I think that is a question he's got to ask: is how impressed is he by what Ten Hag's done, and does he believe that is the future, or does he want to make a quick kill there and then and move on to somebody else?
Yeah, kind of in the same vein, Ali. Like Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal, I know what they are, but their managers have been there for longer, a long time, all 3 of them now. So Manchester United fans would probably point at that. But then there's Brighton, Villa, Spurs. The managers have all been there less time, and they've all managed to implement what they want to do straight away. Why hasn't that been able to happen at Manchester United? Because it does just look like a collection of players thrown together. And in some ways it is, because this is what always happens. You have managers from multiple regimes and end up in the same team. But those three teams that I've just mentioned, the managers have managed to embrace that and take that on board. And I get that there's less pressure at those clubs than there is at Manchester United. But like Jonathan says, for the money they have spent on transfer fees to get players in, I would just expect more than what I've seen so far this season. Mason Mount's come in for a hell of a lot of money, and on the face of it now, the way Ten Hag's feeling he has to play, there is no place for him in that team at all. And I just look at so many things with Manchester United. Just nothing makes sense to me.
Right, yeah, I can't disagree. And I think the Mount example probably sums up what I consider to be the widest issue, which is the decision-making is poor. And the teams that you reference as looking like they play with a clear philosophy and recruit towards it comes down to those generally above manager level or head coach level, having a very clear-minded approach and really targeting certain players to play certain roles and understanding how to build squads so that if a certain player is injured, it's not a massive issue. And, you know, with Mount, I think he's an exceptional player. I don't think that the 2 years he had at Chelsea, in which he was their best player when they won the Champions League, should be sort of overlooked because he's had a subsequent difficult going on almost 2.5, 3 years now. Even so, I look at the team at the moment, and I don't necessarily know where he's meant to play, where they signed him with the idea of him playing, right? Because his fit with Bruno is awkward, I believe. He's not someone like Anthony and Rashford who's going to give you 1v1 ability in wide areas. So, yeah, very, very awkward and kind of sums it all up, I'd say.
I was asked this question the other day. Who is the last midfielder United signed who has been really successful? And by really successful, you say they sort of had 3 good years at the club. You have to go back a long, long way.
Roy Keane.
Yeah, I mean, I flippantly said Roy Keane when I was first asked the question.
Michael, one I can think of.
Michael Carrick is the one I concluded it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's a little bit harsh on Owen Hargreaves, which is only a year difference anyway.
He's always injured. He was always injured, wasn't he? So
Carrick is the last really, last midfielder they signed, you would say, has been a real success. And you look at Casemiro last season. Casemiro had a reasonably good season last season, but even that is a symptom of the problem there. That they signed Casemiro, they signed Rafael Varane, both clearly very, very, very good players. Both players who, on their day, are still excellent. But they're expensive 30-somethings who are on the way down, who are going to have to be phased out. And they were signed as short-term patches to cover over the fact that there's long-term problems there, that they haven't got the recruitment right before.
The worrying thing there would be, Real Madrid hold on to players well into their 30s. You look at Modric and Kroos over the last few years, still going strong for Real Madrid, although gradually their kind of role has changed. Probably this season, actually, Modric's role has definitely changed this year. If they're all there, Casemiro and Varane for want of a better phrase, I don't think Real Madrid sell them to Manchester United.
I think that's completely true, and I think that was my big worry when Casemiro signed. Hang on, he's only 30. What do Real Madrid know? Because Modric is what is he? 38, 37? Yeah, 38. 38. So right up to last season, he was still a regular. So they're not afraid to play a 37-year-old. So Casemiro, you'd have hoped. I mean, okay, different body shape to Modric, slightly different role, but you'd have thought they could have got 4 or 5 more years out of him, unless they had concerns. And I think possibly this season we start to understand what those concerns were.
Yeah, I mean, in the summer I liked the goalkeeper signing, Onana. I thought that would really help them. So far, it possibly hasn't helped them massively, other than Tuesday. And I like Mason Mount as a player, so I thought, they must have a plan for him, but they don't. I think Haaland will become a good player. But even is Amrabat any better than Fred? Ali, realistically, is he?
I don't know. I'll plead the fifth on this one, only because it's only been a couple of appearances in a United shirt. He always looks good. Like he's a pleasing player, I find. And of course, he looked great in the World Cup as well. That's probably my other sort of key experience of him. So I'm going to say too early to say on that front. But I think McTominay's role recently,
I'm going to say he's not good enough. No, he'd be fine as a squad player, but why would you bring something like that in? It's just pointless. It's a hole they needed to fill. He's perfectly adequate to fill that hole. He's not a long-term Manchester United midfielder.
That's what I'm saying.
It's another short-term patch.
Fred could have done that job. I never thought Fred and McTominay were bad players. I just thought the problem was that they were playing together every single week. That was the problem. They were fine as players who would come in much in the mould that Nicky Butt used to, Darren Fletcher, I'm showing my age, going back here. It was when those players used to come in and play the odd game, it worked. It was very good. And I thought, McTominay and Fred can do that. Like you said, they tried to shift McTominay in the summer. Fred's gone. It's just they do have no strategy, and I do think that does come from the problems that are over the top of the manager. So in that respect, you got to feel sorry for Ten Hag. He did well to get them where he got them last season, but Casemiro, they wanted De Jong all summer. they're completely different players. So it's almost like the manager's just having to compromise because of the state of the football club, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. That it was always going to be a period of transition because they had, as you said, they had this cobbled together squad put together by 4 or 5 different managers, and no sort of overarching strategy. The strategy, if there was one, there was that season where they suddenly, we're going to sign young players, and they signed Dan James and a couple of other younger players, and then so 6 months later, actually they're not good enough. We're going to sell them on, and there's if your policy is, we're going to sign young players, that has to have 4, 5, 6 years to work, and you need to do it not as Chelsea have done it by signing 30 of them at once, but by slowly filtering it through. So it's just been a totally chaotic environment for such a long time. But it will take somebody with a really big personality, whether that's on the sporting director side, whether that's on the managerial side, or ideally together. But there's just such a lack of expertise at the club. So for Ten Hag, I mean, after 2 games last season, his first 2 games last season, he lost to Brighton and got hammered by Brentford. Yeah, he completely changed how he wanted to play. He stopped playing out from the back. He realised that De Gea couldn't do that. And I see there's rumours now De Gea could come back, which is...
that can't happen. That would that'd be peak Manchester United.
Why are you appointing Ten Hag, a manager who's very noted for playing a particular style of football, to oversee a squad that can't play that style of football? Okay, you think maybe it'll take a year, maybe 3 transfer windows, and he can have his players in place. And yet, whether because of the players he signed, whether because the sort of rot at the club is just so endemic, it just hasn't worked. And then you get, we haven't even mentioned it, but at most clubs, Sancho would be the biggest issue. How can you have a £71 million talent who has just been frozen out for reasons that still nobody, as far as I can work out, fully understands what's going on there? I don't know. These things can change quickly, but
yeah, they can.
I see very little sign of it yet.
Yeah, football does change quickly. We said last week that 2 years ago, Chelsea v Arsenal. Chelsea looked in a really good place, just won the Champions League, and Arsenal looked like they didn't have a clue. Then the fixture was last week, and you kind of think the opposite. Arsenal are going really well, and Chelsea still trying to work out what they're doing, building gradually, obviously, this season. But let's talk about that team of thugs, Manchester City, Ali. Wish they'd start playing some football, honestly. 19 yellow cards and 2 reds in 9 games. Last season, it was 45 cards overall, so 44 yellows and 1 red. Why are they so dirty this season? Dirty Manchester City.
Yeah, interesting one, this. I think a bit of a boring way to start, but I think the slight change in the threshold or the discipline rules has probably played a factor. A lot of the type of things that often get labelled dark arts that Manchester City and Pep Guardiola project and have done for a long time are possibly being punished more strongly this season. I say that because they're not committing more fouls per game. I looked on Who Scored yesterday that they are not committing more fouls. Therefore, either the fouls they are committing are worse, seems unlikely that it's broadly the same group of players and the same manager, or they're being punished harder for the fouls that they're committing, or they are committing more dissent and things of that nature. So I sort of, Akanji's one of the 2 red cards, right? Akanji was last weekend. His second yellow is not bad discipline. It was, I reckon, basically a crucial decision that he made that helped stop an attack that looked quite dangerous. If he'd been rolled by the Brighton attacker right at the end of the game when they're leading by 1 goal, they're in big trouble. And these are the sorts of cynical fouls, professional fouls, whatever you want to call them, that they've been doing for a long time. So I don't know to what extent is poor discipline. I think a mixture of just not getting away with it as much. And yeah, on that exact example, I think Pep was probably quite happy with Akanji getting booked and picking up another yellow card and being sent off, because they were in trouble if he'd been rolled and lost his man.
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there, to be fair. Let's just end the podcast there. Probably don't need to carry on, because Akanji wearing that number 25 shirt last well, he wears it every week, but last week's very reminiscent of Fernandinho, the kind of things that he did. But you're right, the threshold. Fernandinho used to get away with that every week, and then he passed his knowledge down to Rodri. Rodri's already been sent off this season. So yeah, maybe it's the threshold and all those little things that they do.
Rodri's red card was for grabbing Morgan Gibbs White, wasn't it? So that was a bit of a rush of blood. I think there's other times when he got away with it. It wasn't that bad, but that was a loss of discipline. But one player once, I don't think it's enough to say there's some kind of they're not Arsenal of 20 years ago.
No, I remember a game at Villa Park a few years ago. Rodri and Fernandinho, they were experts at avoiding bookings. I don't know how they did it. They had it down to a T, and I think one of them got booked in like the 80th minute or something, but it should have been booked a lot earlier. They did have that kind of thing down to a T, but the rules have changed, the thresholds have changed, and maybe that has played a part. Let's talk about Jeremy Doku, Jonathan. Is he an upgrade on what Manchester City have had in those positions previously? It's a bit of a throwback to kind of the way Sterling and Sane played on the wing. Are we seeing another evolution of a Pep side of him trying to change the way they build up?
Well, we might be seeing an evolution. I think he's a lot more direct than maybe not more direct than Sane, but I think he's more direct than Sterling. Guardiola's always had this thing where he wants a team to have 15 passes in any move, so they get set to deal with a potential counter if possession's lost. And you saw how he reprogrammed Grealish to fit in with that. And Grealish last season, I thought tactically was excellent. And Grealish has spoken very intelligently about that. Doku doesn't do any of that. Doku just runs, and he's been brilliant. That little swerve, the slowdown and acceleration to beat, was it Igor Julio? Sorry, for the Alvarez goal last week.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's so simple, but it's absolutely devastating. It's brilliant to watch. And he scored the vital goal, the equaliser against West Ham. He got another goal against Leipzig. He's 21. He's never played at a club better than Rennes before. It's a brilliant start. But you do slightly wonder what's going on with Grealish. Why is Grealish not getting the game? I know he had the injury earlier in the season, but he's not injured now. The two of them playing together last night, I don't think look particularly. I mean, it's one game, but the balance that doesn't naturally strike you as a Guardiola balance. So you do wonder if Grealish is looking at that, thinking, well, "Hang on, I had to completely change how I played, and he's just doing what I used to do." So if you compare Grealish's stats last season to Doku's Doku, he's had 8.42 take-ons per game this season. Grealish only had 4.82 last season. Now, Doku's completion rate or success rate in dribbles is slightly higher than Grealish's was, but even with that, he loses the ball twice as often as Grealish did. Grealish, I haven't got the stat in front of me, but I think he averaged 39 point something passes per game last season, or passes per 90. Doku's is 31 point something, and Grealish's completion rate, I think it's 84% to 78%. So Grealish was keeping the ball a lot better, and that's what Guardiola has historically always wanted. So you do wonder is he just blooding Doku now? Is it because he sort of thinks, this stage of the season, it's a good chance to do it, build his confidence up? Maybe at the same time, slightly sort of warning Grealish after his very enthusiastic celebration, shall we say, of a treble, that you're not guaranteed your place in this team. Maybe it is just that, but if this directness is part of the plan, then it is a change. And I think also, if you look at the stats, opponents have attacked down the City left, the opponent's right, way more than through the centre or the other side this season, suggesting they're targeting the fullback, be that Guardiola or Ake. So I mean, if you remember the Wolves game, and Netto ran at Ake, because nobody was checking him out with the pitch. He was able to do that. And I think some ridiculous statistic, like he advanced the ball 215 metres in that game, which is a ludicrous figure. 130 is high, 215 is exceptional. So I think there is a structural issue there. And that possibly is why City have been a little bit stodgy. I mean, by reasonable standards, they've been great. But by their own standards, slightly stodgy. They've only scored 19 goals in the 9 games this season. They had 33 at this stage last season.
We've got the Who Scored stats here. I've got them in front of me. The only metric from Grealish's appearances last season to Doku's this season, the only metric Grealish is apparently better at is key passes per 90, goals, assists, shots, conversion rate, and dribbles per 90. Doku comes out in top. Now, it's a smaller sample size for Doku.
It's also those stats don't tell you about the knock-on effect to the rest of the team. They tell you about that individual. But I think if you're looking at a Guardiola team, you've got to look holistically. You've got to look at the whole.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on Grealish. Tactically, he was brilliant last season. He's not the same swashbuckling player that I would have watched for years at Villa, but tactically, he'd improved and he'd done well to adapt his game to kind of do what Pep wants. But Ali, on the face of it, those things that Doku is doing, Jack Grealish can do, but it's almost like he's not allowed to when he plays for Manchester City.
Yeah, it's quite sad, really. I think an aspect to this is that when Grealish was at his best for Villa, he was doing things that were just so wonderful to watch, and not just for you, Dan, but even for the neutrals as well.
It was everyone's favourite player, essentially, outside of their own team, wasn't it?
Right, but I think there's probably a kind of, not to get too in the weeds, I'm no psychologist, but there's probably something in our brains where we're expecting to see a certain thing. We're not seeing it anymore. We don't like that. We want to see Grealish carrying the ball with such vim and vigour as he used to, and for whatever reason, he barely dribbles now compared to a couple of years ago. So, of course, that's tactical. That is based on instructions. There could be something more in terms of the sports science side, the physical side. He has played a lot of football. He's probably sort of ahead of the curve for his age in terms of minutes played, certainly in terms of how many times he's been booted up in the air. So,
battered in the Championship, by the way, every game.
Having said that, he is a very imposing physical specimen now compared to what he was before. So sometimes getting stronger in terms of upper body and bulkier also has an effect on your agility and your balance and things like that. So who really knows? It's a bit sad, but at least we get to watch Doku because he's doing the things that generally are entertaining to watch. He's kind of the puppy, isn't he, of the Man City team, where he's just doing everything at a million miles an hour, not seemingly thinking too much about the consequences, and it hasn't been trained out of him yet.
Yeah, seems to be allowed to do that. Pep seems quite content with what Doku's doing, because if he wasn't, he basically just wouldn't pick him, because that's how Pep operates. Just lastly on the Grealish thing, Jonathan, you're saying he's out of the team at the moment, which he is. I guess this is just the kind of thing that Pep does. For Grealish's first season, he spent long spells out the team. Foden had a massive patch where he wasn't really getting games last season, and now this season he's back in favour. It's almost like this is how Pep manages his players. He'll keep them out for an extended period of time, and then at some point they'll come back in and be really, really hungry and try and prove him wrong. It's almost an aspect of his management. He's done it with Sterling, I think, in the past as well, and even Sana. This is just what he does with players.
Yeah, and then the players who don't like it, like Cancelo, end up getting sold. So, I mean, I get the impression that the Guardiola was not particularly happy with how Grealish celebrated the treble. I think he felt that was not a particularly professional approach. Yeah, Guardiola's idea of a good time is pretending to smoke a cigar and having a thimbleful of beer at Oktoberfest. He's not a hedonist, and maybe he sort of thinks it's not the worst thing to get Doku involved early. I think the fixture list has been quite interesting for City as well. That they had a pretty, and I know they played Newcastle second game, was it? A second or third game. So that was a difficult game. But that aside, they had a pretty gentle start. And it's only really now that it's starting to get into the tough games. So maybe he just sort of saw that as a chance to get Doku playing when he could play with a bit of freedom. Because I just can't see that when it comes to games against Liverpool, against big Champions League games, that he's going to be using Doku in that way. I think he'll want the control.
No, it'd be interesting to see how that story develops. Grealish is too good a player to be sitting on the bench every single week. But then so Doku, so is Foden. This is just Manchester City. Bernardo Silva. This is just what Manchester City are. Let's have a quick look at the Manchester Derby combined 11. Then, Jonathan, I don't know whether you've seen this, or Ali, have either of you seen this combined 11? Now, have a guess how many Manchester United players have made the WhoScored combined 11?
3.
Ali?
2.
Jonathan, you are correct. 3 Manchester United players. Can you guess the 3?
Bruno Fernandes.
Correct.
Dalot.
Correct again.
They've massively over-prioritised people who've scored goals. Maguire.
Incorrect. Hello. Chance to come back into the game.
Onana.
Correct. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
But between you, you've got the 3. So It's a legacy who scored 4-4-2 here with a Nana in goal with what feels like quite a low rating of 6.771. I'm not sure how Edison's is lower than that this season. Back four of Dalot, Diaz, Ake, and Gvardiol. We've got Foden, Fernandes, Rodri, and Doku in midfield, and then it's Haaland and Alvarez as the front two there. So yeah, wouldn't be the team I'd pick, but this is what Who Scored have come up with. Spent a long time on the Manchester derby this week. My fault, managing the minutes really poorly there. Let's have our predictions for this week. Ali, who's been boosting George up the league, they've become a duo in the predictions now. What's your prediction for this one?
1-0 to Man City for me. This
1-0 to Manchester City. I've gone for 2-0 to Manchester City. Just Manchester United going forward just don't look like they've got a plan to me, and against Manchester City, I don't think they'll manage to conjure up much. Jonathan, who in fairness, Sam's dragging you down with the predictions.
Oh, it's awful. 2-1 to City.
2-1 to City, so a clean sweep for Manchester City, unsurprisingly. Let's do the rest of our predictions before we look at Wolves against Newcastle then. So Palace against Tottenham, Jonathan.
1-0 Spurs.
1-0 to Spurs. I've gone for Palace 1, Tottenham 1. I think this will be a Tottenham dropping point, surprisingly. Ali?
2-0 to Tottenham.
2-0 to Tottenham. Chelsea v Brentford, Ali.
I'm going to this game. I think it's going to be 2-1 to Chelsea.
I've gone for 2-1 to Brentford, really mixing up my predictions this week. Jonathan?
1-0 to Chelsea.
1-0 to Chelsea. Bournemouth v Burnley, Jonathan?
1-0 to Bournemouth.
1-0 to Bournemouth. I've gone for 1-1. Ali?
Yeah, 1-1 draw for me.
1-1 as well. Arsenal v Sheffield United, Ali?
4-0 to Arsenal.
4-0 to Arsenal. I've gone 3-0 to Arsenal. Jonathan?
Also 3-0 to Arsenal.
3-0. We'll come on to Wolves and Newcastle later. West Ham against Everton, Jonathan?
2-1 to West Ham.
2-1 West Ham. I've gone 1-1. Ali?
Yeah, 1-1 as well. That's annoying.
1-1.
We've done the same twice now. 2 1-1s together.
Stop copying me. I know I got my predictions in first. Liverpool against Forest, Ali?
3-0 Liverpool.
Bloody hell. 3-0 Liverpool as well. Jonathan?
2-0 Liverpool.
2-0 Liverpool. The big one, Jonathan, Villa against Luton? 2-0
to Villa.
Yep, 2-0 to Villa here as well. Ali?
3-1 Villa.
Brighton against Fulham, Ali?
2-0 Brighton.
2-0 Brighton. I've gone for 3-1 to Brighton. Jonathan?
2-1 to Brighton.
2-1 to Brighton. Finally, a little bit of a mixed bag in the predictions there with the last one. And of course, we've already done our Manchester United and Manchester City predictions. Let's talk about Wolves v Newcastle then, Jonathan. Unfortunate defeat for Newcastle last night. I thought in large periods they were pretty good. They're coming up against a team that's got a multitude of Champions League experience compared to the players that are on the pitch for them. Really, I thought they were unfortunate, but these things happen. I guess they're going to lose games at points. Newcastle, they've still, I'd say, got off to a decent start in that group.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the performance was perfectly good. Hit the bar twice. They get done on the break. The way they conceded the goal, it's a classic game where 30 years ago people would talk about the English team getting sort of picked off by the wilier Continentals. It's not that at all. They just got a bit unlucky. They played perfectly well, got done on the break. It happens, and Dortmund have the quality that maybe a lower Premier League team doesn't have to hit them on the break when they have that level of possession in the opposition half. So I think the result, or maybe not even the result, but the performance that has been weakest in the Champions League group, the performance that might sort of be the one that means they don't qualify for the next phase, is that goalless draw in Milan. I thought they were extraordinarily cautious in that game.
And don't you think that's a good result, 0-0 away from home at Milan?
Well, it's not a bad result, but I think the way Milan were at the time, the fact that they've been hammered in the derby, I think they were there to be got at. And Newcastle, I think, were a bit over cagey, but they were brilliant against PSG. And I don't know what Newcastle's expectations of the Champions League are. If it's to have some brilliant nights, well, they've hammered PSG, and that's one of those games, one of those results that's going to resonate for, unless they have extraordinary success in the next 20 years. But even then, it's the start of this era. So in the same way that the Espria hat-trick resonates, that performance will resonate.
Yeah, I agree with you. That was a real throwback performance to Newcastle back in the day against Barcelona. I felt, Ali, watching them last night in that type of game. I mean, to be fair, we should be previewing the Wolves game, but I feel like the Champions League performance last night was relevant. Can't go into the intricacies of what Tonyali Tonali, we talk about Strictly Come Dancing here, Tonali has done. But, he's been on the bench the last couple of games. But in that game last night, I felt like from the start, he was the kind of player that they were lacking in that midfield to break down a resolute Dortmund.
Yeah, I mean, they had the majority of the ball, didn't they? So, you want your best ball progressors in the defensive middle third, and you want the guys that are going to be able to loft one over the top to a non-rushing fullback or a wide player, whatever it might be. Those are the skills that Tonali has. Broadly, the central midfield hasn't been an issue for them with or without Tonali this season. I think the likes of Longstaff and Joel Linton, have performed pretty well in general, haven't they? So I mean, his absence is going to hit them hard because he was clearly someone that they went after specifically in the summer to make them better. So if he's not around, then that's going to not make them better.
But I guess one thing, you'll have watched a lot of these players. I know you cover the EFL quite heavily, Ali. Is he's made squad players better. Eddie Howe, and again, we talk about Manchester United. I think it comes from having a defined system and knowing what they want to do. And actually, I missed Newcastle out earlier when I was talking about the teams that were ahead of Manchester United. The likes of Murphy, Lascelles, Wilson, and Longstaff. I mean, it was a bit harsh to call Wilson the squad player because I don't think he is, and probably Longstaff actually. But when these players come in, generally they perform to a level that we've not seen them perform to in the Premier League before.
Yeah, it's amazing. For me, it's the most impressive thing in football management is when someone achieves what Eddie Howe has done, not necessarily a complete control in tactical terms, not necessarily turning an amazing team into a fully dominant team, but in taking what you are given when you arrive at a club in the main and raising the level significantly of the individuals and of the collective. Broadly, a great way to approach football tactics is to look at the squad that you have and to build a system where the players suit it. They understand their jobs, their weaknesses are hidden, and their strengths are kind of, heightened. And I think you have to say he's done that with a lot of the players that you mentioned. So it's incredibly impressive to take players who we all remember the sorts of clickbait articles being written when the takeover happened about Mbappe and 10 players Newcastle United will sign with billions of pounds. Well, actually, the players that have taken them to an incredible level, not just Champions League finishing top 4, but the performances as well, which are so strong, are the players that everyone thought would be jettisoned, or many of them anyway. And that is, for me, the best thing that a manager can do, really, in the modern game in particular, where recruitment is not generally their remit, unlike the old days.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Gordon's having a great start to the season as well. Jonathan, I'd say he looked their best player last night to me as well. He's 4th in the WhoScored form rankings. I know you hate this kind of question, and I'm a little bit with you, but it's in the script. I'm going to give it to you. If he sustains this form, can he break into the England squad?
Yeah, I mean, he must be in the reckoning, but it's an area where England are very strong. And Gareth Southgate has proved over and over again that he likes to keep his squad as stable as possible.
Yeah.
And England have a lot of really good wide attacking players. So if Anthony Gordon maintains this form, then yeah, he's clearly knocking on the door. England can probably take 5 of that type of player if in a 26-man squad.
Do we know whether it's 26 or 23 yet? Do we not know at this point?
I think it's now 26 because of the 5 subs, isn't it?
Possibly. I've absolutely no idea.
Yeah, you might be right. I don't know, but I think the fact they've gone to 26, I doubt they'll go back. But okay, Saka, Foden, Grealish. There's one other who I'm not thinking of. Rashford. Yeah, they're the sort of first choice 4. If Sterling carries on his form, yeah, he's got to be in with a shout. I suspect what happened at the World Cup when he went home for the last 16 game and came back. The way Southgate's treated him since makes you think Southgate wasn't overly impressed by that, which maybe means he looked for the younger option.
I guess Maddison's the 5th one of those players at the moment because he can kind of cover multiple.
And Maddison can play centrally as well, which is very useful.
Bowen was in the last squad as well.
Yeah, Bowen.
Yeah, I think
sort of wide forward type.
Pretty ordinary. I mean, he's having a great season, but compared to those others, I think he's pretty ordinary. Ordinary is a bad word. Sorry, he's not quite at the same level as them.
No, I guess it would maybe he's the next cab off the rank if there is an injury. If Rashford, for example, was to miss the Euros, maybe there'd probably then be a place for Anthony Gordon. Direct runner.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if Rashford's form remains poor, and Rashford actually played pretty well against Italy So his international form has been fine. But he is a slightly different type of player because he is a goal scorer. He does give you that directness. And the danger if you pack your team with these sort of gifted technical wide forwards is they don't bring enough goals. Rashford, I guess, gives you, I at the minute you assume it would be Kane and Watkins as the two centre forwards. He gives you cover for that position as well, in extremis. So I think for Gordon to displace Rashford will be pretty hard, assuming fitness. But yeah, if a couple of them are injured, then he would seem to be the logical choice.
Yeah, let's talk about Wolves then, Ali. What have you made of them so far this season? I've got to say, I've been quite impressed with Wolves and Gary O'Neill in recent weeks. I haven't actually watched the Monday Night Football masterclass from Gary O'Neill that apparently was on television either, so I've not been influenced like that. I'm usually very heavily influenced by that kind of thing. But Wolves are making a decent fist of it. And I went to Molineux a few weeks ago when Villa played there. It's a real tough place to go, Molineux. One of the toughest in the Premier League, I would say.
Yeah, I think they are certainly making a decent fist of it. This is a team who, for the last few years, have survived and not a lot more, I would say. In particular, as an attacking team, they've been among the worst in the Premier League for a long time. So at the moment, they do look like they've improved going forward. They've scored in every game this season, apart from that opening game against Manchester United, which most people watched because it was one of the first televised games of the season. And everyone left very impressed with Wolves, and they could and should have scored. So yeah, I think they're doing okay. That the bigger issue is the inverse of last season. They're scoring more, but it's come at the cost of their defensive record. So they're not really keeping clean sheets. And that will be a concern if, for example, Pedro Neto was to get injured. Then, given what Jonathan said about the value that he's offering in terms of carrying the ball up the pitch, because they do look like a sort of transition first team. He's not the only good performer. I think Cunha's looked pretty good. Kalajdzic has scored a couple of goals in about 60 minutes of football and could come on in the next few weeks as he gets back up to speed. I think you have to be pretty impressed. They've played 5 away games and 4 at home. The 4 home games all against current top 7 teams. Their away games, they lost to United and Palace, but otherwise beating Everton, beating Bournemouth and drawing with Luton. So certainly above what I expected so far from them this season.
Yeah, I had them in the bottom 3 because I just quite simply couldn't see how they were going to score any goals, but they've made me look silly, as normal, as usually happens with me and my predictions. Jonathan, you've already spoken about Pedro Neto a little bit earlier on in the pod. Wolves are unbeaten in 4 now. Neto is an incredibly high-level, dangerous footballer, isn't he?
Really good. And I think the point Ali makes about the way that Gary O'Neill wants to play, that defend fairly deep, attack and transition, he's the perfect player for that. Kalajdzic as well, you would think, is the perfect centre forward for that, because you can just launch it long, and because he's 9'2" or whatever, he will win knockdowns, he will win headers, he will win free kicks. So I think I almost by accident, I think they've come upon a level of coherence that you probably wouldn't have expected, seeing the sell-off they've had over the last couple of transfer windows. Yeah,
Wang's been playing as well. He's a very useful player, I would say. We've got a head-to-head here, Neto versus Gordon. The thing that's standing out to me, I knew he'd got a few assists, Neto, Jonathan. 6 assists in 9 games. It's a hell of a record.
Yeah, that's very high. And again, it just shows you that he is their main... The main point of transition between midfield and attack, that he's the one who carries it and he's the one who delivers it. But I think he's always been a really good player. It's just he had that injury that kept him out for so long. And now he's back, and he's back to fitness, and maybe if he hadn't had the injury, he would have been moved on by now.
Yeah, he seems to hit the woodwork in every game. I don't know whether that's some recency bias from me, because he hit the woodwork when I saw him on Match of the Day the other way. But I feel like he hits the woodwork in every game as well. Well, Neto, he feels like quite an unlucky player to me in terms of his goal output. I always feel like he's unfortunate not to score more. Predictions then for this one: Wolves against Newcastle. I have gone for Wolves 1, Newcastle 2. Jonathan?
Snap, 2-1 Newcastle.
And looking at Ali's face, I'm presuming he's in exactly the same.
Yeah, that's right. 2-1 to Newcastle.
No jeopardy in that game at all from a predictions perspective. Let's finish with our team in focus section then. And this week, we're going to look at Bournemouth. Ali, except for in trouble, what are Bournemouth?
Bournemouth are an absolute disaster defensively and completely undermining themselves because of it. I think We've seen some flashes going forward where they've looked fairly dangerous. They've had, because of the relationship between Solanke and Billing in particular, who've been there for quite a few years, I always think that they do have in them some really nice attacks, good passing and movement, and the goal that they scored last weekend was exactly that, and just looks so slick. But they are incapable at the moment of keeping the opposition from cutting through them and creating not just a lot of shots, but a lot of good shots, a lot of high quality chances. And it's just, that the issue here is that they made a bold call to bring in Iraola, that there was no secret about the way that he was going to approach things. And it was going to be more front footed, a much higher defensive line, much more aggressive in the press. And it's kind of, as far as I understand it, a truth of football tactics that if you can implement that style of play and do it well, generally teams like that don't face a huge amount of shots because they are keeping the opposition away from their goal. When your defense gets pierced, you do give up pretty good chances because you haven't packed the box with defenders. The worst thing you can be is a team with a really high line that are also giving up among the most amount of shots in the league. So, the caveat here is they've played 5 of their 9 games against Arsenal, Tottenham, Liverpool, Chelsea and Brighton, and only 3 of the games against current bottom half teams. So I feel like every time I come on here, I try and say, let's not go too far in the first chunk of the season. Let's have a look at the fixtures and try and understand a bit more context. Even so, this match is just undeniably huge, isn't it, really?
Yeah, in Ali Maxwell as well. No one's getting relegated. We've got to look at put the positive spin on.
Well, no one's getting relegated, but also not everyone has to get sacked straight away.
No, I completely agree.
That's my world.
Completely agree. If they sacked him now, I actually think that would show a little bit of cluelessness from the Bournemouth board, Jonathan. Look, you've made such a big decision, and replacing O'Neill with Iraola was a massive call, a massive decision. You've got to back yourselves and stick with it because these things don't just change overnight. Ali's right.
The point about the fixture list is, I think, a really interesting one because, I remember when Steve Bruce was Sunderland manager, and
my condolences, Jonathan.
Sunderland were doing really well. They were, I think, they had the game where they won 3-0 at Stamford Bridge, and then in the space of a week, Darren Bent was sold to Villa for 20 odd million. Asamoah Gyan suddenly decides he wants to move to wherever it was in the Middle East he moved to.
Ahead of the curve, Asamoah Gyan, by the way. Really
yeah, I think Sunderland's next 7 fixtures were against the previous season's top 6 and away at Stoke. They got 1 point from that, and suddenly Bruce is finished. And it's so, hang on, you just lost 2 centre forwards. You've had a ludicrously hard run of games, but confidence goes, and it's then very hard to get it back because people are talking about crisis, are talking about problems, and so even performances aren't that bad. If you don't get the result, people are very critical. And you look at their games this season. The first really bad performance was the defeat to Everton. 1-1 at home against West Ham. It's fine. The 3-1 defeat to Liverpool, they played pretty well in that game. You could have got something out of it. They put Liverpool under a bit of pressure. Losing 2-0 to Tottenham. Well, lots of teams lose to Tottenham. It wasn't. They were 1-0 down. They were putting pressure on. They looked okay. 2-2 away at Brentford. That's a pretty good result. Going to Brentford's hard. 0-0 at home to Chelsea. It's all right. They could have won that game.
Finally found my soulmate on this show. Yeah. I finally found the soulmate.
Getting beat 3-1 at Brighton. Lots of teams lose at Brighton. And then they get beat 4-0 by Arsenal, 3-0 by Everton, and 2-1 by Wolves. And you start to think, oh, hang on. Maybe it's just rubbish. But,
he railed you in, Ali, and then he's put you back out.
But it's you sort of think, if the fixtures has been flipped round, would they got a couple of wins? Would they've had a bit more confidence? You sort of look at what they're trying to do. Pressing is notoriously a very hard thing to measure how well the team presses. But the sort of the rule of thumb stat is the opposition's passes per defensive action. So how many passes the opposition has before you win the ball back off them? That's gone down 15.7 to 11.8 from last season to this season. So they're pressing. And that's not a criticism of Gary O'Neill because that wasn't how they were trying to play. But you see that that has improved by nearly 25%, which is pretty impressive. But they're conceding 18 shots a game. Oh, that's a big problem. And at the same time, while the defence is a big problem, they've only scored is it 6 goals this season, I think, in the league. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 goals this season. I think they're very reliant on Solanke for both goals and creativity. I think it's 80% of those goals he's been involved in either as a scorer or the creator. Well, that makes you very easy to defend against. You sit on Solanke, and what are you going to do? They've been a bit unlucky that two of their midfield signings have had injuries. Alex Scott made his debut the game at Wolves.
I like that.
And Tyler Adams is now out till the new year with his hamstring problem. So, yeah, the players you bring in to try and help the new manager introduce his style aren't available, which makes it harder. So I think there's all kinds of mitigating factors, but are they now on a doom spiral that can only be got out of with the blood sacrifice of Iraola? Well, maybe.
Yeah.
The footballing gods, they need blood.
The gods of football need blood. It's true. It's true.
I mean, they could do with a win against Burnley. There's no doubt about that because, you know, we're talking about fixtures. The 2 games after that are Manchester City and Newcastle. You know, if they don't get a win in the next 3 games, suddenly you are looking at them and thinking, well, we're into November now and they're in big trouble. So
but they must have a really easy run through December then. If they've got, we just talked about how they've had a really hard fixtures. You're saying they've got some hard games coming up. How's that happened?
No. They're all hard games in the Premier League, aren't they? They're all difficult games.
This is made for somebody to do what Roy Hodgson did at Palace last year and sort of come in with sort of 10 games to go and suddenly win 7 of them and be lauded as the great old master. Well, you're just beating some lower half sides while poor Patrick Vieira's been getting beaten by the teams in the top half.
Yeah, well, the relegation picture was, you know, at one point, you know, 9 teams looked like they could be in trouble. I don't think the Premier League is going to be like that this season. I think it's a top quality Premier League, actually, especially if you look at some of the top half teams. So it's going to be difficult for Bournemouth. But I think what we're trying to say here, the crux of the situation is you can't employ a manager to completely change the style of the football club, and then when you get a few bad results, get rid of him. You have to give him time. So yeah, we've had a little look at Bournemouth.
The performance against Burnley is massively important. Obviously, the focus will be on the result, but if they are clearly second best against Burnley in game week 10, that is a massive issue. So that's what I'll be looking closely at. Because, you know, if it wasn't for Cook's straight red at 1-1 last week, what does that game finish?
Yeah.
You know, these are the sorts of things that are still having an impact on results. So yeah.
You say that about the performance versus the result, you know, but if they play brilliantly and lose, that's no good, is it?
Well, it's no good, but surely we're at the point now in kind of I don't know, football discourse to realise that if your team are forming well, creating better chances than the opposition in the main, then just sacking the manager to get a new one in, it's not necessarily a very good time to do that, because if you keep doing that, then you probably will start picking up points. So, but I understand that the sort of the gravitational pull of the relegation zone is enough to get, you know, trigger fingers pretty twitchy.
Yeah, I reckon my prediction is you might see Graham Potter appear in the media at some point soon, just to let people know he's available. He might feel like a fit for Bournemouth if they were to do that. And you know, interesting, Jonathan talks about Solanke, because I am convinced there's a real top centre forward in Solanke. He actually has everything that you would want from a modern day centre forward. In my opinion, I think in a better team, Solanke scores a lot of goals and becomes a real high level player. But yeah, we're nearly out of time, so probably not the time to start talking about Dominic Solanke. So thank you very much to you both for joining me on the Edge of the Box podcast today. I really enjoyed both of your companies, and I wish you no luck whatsoever in the Predictions League this week. We will be back next week to preview next week's Premier League action, as we always do here on the Who Scored podcast. So make sure you're subscribing with your post notifications on. Leave us a comment as well wherever you are digesting this podcast. We'd like to hear from you. Do you agree with our opinions in this show? But the most important thing for you to do is, wherever you're taking in the podcast, is to subscribe, because we want to get those numbers up. We'll be back again next week, rotating our panel. Tell all your friends and family about the pod, and have an excellent weekend.